Today on TFL Classics, you join Tommy and I here in the studio because we have something very important to talk about. Truck prices right now are crazy. We've been talking about that a bunch around the office. So we wanted to discuss a few great trucks that you can buy or should be able to buy for less than $10,000.
And this is the Classics channel, so these are going to be older vehicles and vehicles that are interesting and in some cases may even appreciate in value. Some of that has already happened on some of these rigs, but we're going to hopefully find you guys some cool vehicles, that is still relatively affordable.
Yeah, of course, not all of the examples of these vehicles are going to be less than $10,000, but in theory, you should be able to find a relatively decent one for around that price.
Yeah, right. So, Case, why don't you start us off with number 10?
Oh, number 10 is so obvious. Who would see it coming? It's the second-gen Cummins. It's the truck that I bought. Around about a year ago, I bought my second-gen Cummins for $8,000, and it's been a super solid truck.
Yeah, so the second gens especially, for a long time were just kind of like used trucks, and you saw them a lot as work trucks and, just vehicles that people use. They were somewhat disposable. But especially within the last couple of years, it seems like a lot of folks are actually starting to collect these and really put a lot of thought and effort and time in restoring these vehicles, which is interesting because they're really not all that old. They started in, 94?
Yeah, 94 was the first year of the second gen.
And then specifically the Cummins, because that is, I think, really what solidified this generation of Dodge truck as being, collectible and worthwhile. Not to say that like the 5.9, the 1500s, and the 5.2s were bad trucks. It's just that the Cummins was legendary in these vehicles. Tell me about what made those so special.
Oh, well, they're just super, super simple, solid, reliable engines. Everything in them is gear driven. Say what you want to about the rest of the truck, but that Cummins engine itself is really solid. And actually, the 8-liter V10 that they offered in these trucks is pretty cool too, but I like the Cummins a lot.
And I think the other cool thing about these trucks is it was a big departure for Dodge styling. For a long time, pretty much every truck in the market was just a box, and then this truck came out and people hadn't really seen anything like this with that big rig look where the hood is actually higher than the fenders, and that was a really big deal, and that's kind of what made them so significant. And that look actually continues all the way through today. It's got the iconic crosshairs in the front. They did update the design a little bit, right, in the end of the production with the sport bumper.
Yeah, they came out with things like the sport bumper. Of course, later on, they also added the extended cab, and then they updated the interior as well. Mine is a first year, mine is a 1994, and I like the older interior and everything. But no, they're great trucks. The Cummins engines do suffer from a couple little issues. One of the more notable ones is a killer dowel pin. That's, of course, something that's pretty easy to fix. I fixed it on my motor. And then the manual transmissions are generally a lot tougher than the automatics.
Yes.
But they're solid trucks. Mine's at 250,000 miles, bulletproof, reliable. It's been a great vehicle, so I've got no complaints.
Still going strong. So number 9 is a little bit unusual. It would have been not that long ago where when we were talking about, affordable classics, we would have had the square body Chevys on this list from, the 70s through the early 80s. But those have really just shot up in value. I mean, they've gotten really expensive, which is, rather unfortunate. But the good news is the next generation of Chevy truck is now becoming, a little bit more sought after. And even those are starting to go up a little bit. So why don't you tell me about number 9?
Yeah, so number 9 is the truck of choice of our good friend David Morrow. He, in fact, has 3 of them that are running all the same year, 1992 454 Chevys, heavy duties. All of his trucks have NV4500 transmissions. He likes the 92 because he says, I think they have a lower crawling gear in that transmission. But they're awesome trucks. One really cool thing about them, like the 3500 Chevy that he has independent front suspension. So even though it's a 3500, it rides incredibly smooth.
Yeah, so these were called, I think the GMT 400, right, was the internal designation of this truck. And they built them like we were talking about, just like the second gens in both half-ton and HD configuration. Case specifically chose the 454, the big blocks, because it's just a cool thing to have. I think there was even an SS version where you could get like a high-performance model. Those ones are already getting pretty expensive. But if you can just find like a 2500 with the 454 in the manual, you can hop them up, you can put a cool exhaust on them. Really well-made trucks. The early ones had this really funky instrumentation on the interior with these really blocky radios.
Yeah, the dash on that truck is honestly really cool. All
Bizarre.
the buttons, everything. It looks like a 1980s calculator. It's way cool.
And then we also had the 1500 version through this No Payment Needed series. I think it was like a 1998 or 96. And
Something like that.
That one had the updated interior, which wasn't as cool, but the early ones were really, really funky. You're right, they look like a calculator. So definitely check out the GMT 400 era of Chevrolet trucks. Really well made as well. So next up on the list is the 7.3 Power Stroke. What are we talking about?
Yeah, so 7.3 Power Stroke. It's the first Power Stroke named engine, diesel engine from Ford, and these are just unbelievably solid diesel motors. They're right up there with the 12-valve Cummins. One common issue that I've read about with them, I've never actually owned one myself, but a cam position sensor can go bad on them. But other than that, I mean, they're very solid. I know a couple people that have them around about 300,000 miles and still driving them all the time. Really no major issues.
Is that attainable for 10K? Can you get a 7.3 for about 10K?
I have a buddy that bought one for about $7,000.
Okay.
So it might be, I would guarantee it's a lot more difficult to do right now.
Right.
But it should, at least in a more normal truck market, be possible.
And remind folks, if they're looking for a 7.3 and they find a similar truck that just happens to have a 6-liter, is that worth buying?
I know people actually that like the 6-liter a lot, like its tuning capability. That motor has issues, but from what I'm told, it's all repairable. It's all doable if you want to make that motor put out more power. But from everyone that I've talked to that knows these trucks, because again, I've never actually owned myself a 7.3 or a 6.0 Power Stroke. It sounds like the 7.3, if you just want a bulletproof, reliable engine, is the way to go.
All right, that's good. That's good consumer advice right there. And you can tune them up to make quite a bit of power like you're talking about. So next up on the list is a vehicle I have a lot of experience with. It is the Jeep Comanche. So this was built starting in the mid-1980s. It's basically a pickup truck version of the Cherokee, the really square one.
Yeah.
It used something called the Uniframe, which was this bizarre combination of unibody and frame, but it's a really cool looking truck. They're kind of getting desirable, so for a long time you could pick up a really good one for like 4 or 5K. Now a really good one is going to be like 12 or 13, but you can still find decent drivers for under 10. 4-liter straight 6. If you're smart, you'll get the 4-liter straight 6. Don't get the V6 because it was pretty bad. Short bed, 4-wheel drive is a desirable ones. And then don't get the French transmission. So certain years also had the Peugeot transmission, which was just a garbage pile. But if you can find one with the 4-liter in good shape, that's not that rusty, they'll go forever. They last a long time. Parts are somewhat easy to get. You know, there's a couple things you can't get though. Taillights and rear bumpers.
Really?
Yeah, taillights, so valuable for some reason because you can't get them.
I would think those would be two things that you would want to have very
readily
available.
available. Yeah. And they didn't make as many as the Cherokees. Part of the reason why they're more sought after, more desirable.
Well, I guess the whole front end of that truck is pretty much the same as it was on the Cherokee. So those parts I would imagine are probably interchangeable.
I don't think doors are the same, but like
Right.
dashboards. A lot of people put the facelifted Cherokee front ends on them. Do you
Really?
remember when they kind of got like more roundy?
Yeah.
For, like the late 90s. You can
I
swap
like the
those on
boxy
them.
front end.
Yeah, you stay with the boxy one. Don't swap them.
You know, I'm actually really upset that I never got to drive our Comanche. That was a gorgeous truck.
It was pretty nice to drive. It drives a lot like a Cherokee. Avoid ones that are too lifted, I would say. You want to find more of the originality in the Comanches. But yeah, if you want to take them off-road, you can do a lot with them. So speaking of kind of smaller trucks, what is next up on the list?
Yes. We're getting back to my favorite truck brand, Dodge Dakota. Early Dodge Dakotas, like the first and the second gen. These are cool because you could get, engine-wise, anything from an inline 4-cylinder to a V6 to a V8. The first generation of the Dodge Dakota, in 1989, there was even a Shelby version of it with a 5.2-liter V8.
Jeez.
Yeah, you could get Dakotas with
convertible.
5-speed manuals. Yeah, there was a convertible.
Yeah.
So they're actually pretty cool trucks.
I like the first gens a lot, the really, really boxy ones.
Yeah.
Rust, I think, is a pretty big issue.
Definitely.
From what I've seen poking around online. But Kent just bought one, as I understand it. Go figure, it needed a transmission.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I didn't know he bought a Dakota.
He did. Yeah, he bought a first-gen Dakota. Very cool, though. I really like the Dakota a lot, and I think they are going to be very collectible here pretty soon. They may already be going up in value. So next up is the Tacoma, one that we have a lot of experience with. And why the Tacoma versus the older Toyota trucks?
The nice thing about it, and especially going with a more modern version of it, is just that it's going to be a little bit more drivable day to day. And in our experience, the Tacoma is unbelievably good off-road. A lot of them had factory rear lockers. Ours actually didn't, but even though ours didn't have a factory rear locker, it still crushed it when we took it to Moab. And we bought that truck for $7,700, if I remember right, which for an older Tacoma is not super cheap. Ours was really straight, but you can definitely pick up a good Tacoma for less than 10 grand, take it off-road. Of course, there's no shortage of rust issues on those as well.
Yes.
But if you want to go off-road, Tacoma is pretty high on my list of trucks.
So the reason that the Tacoma, in my opinion, is on the list versus the older Toyota trucks, that date back through the 80s. If you look at the older trucks from like the mid-80s, I think they were cooler in a lot of ways, but they only fall into one of two camps. They're either pristine and $40,000, or they are entirely made out of iron oxide. There's nothing in between. Yeah, Swiss cheese or pristine.
No metal left.
Yeah, exactly. Whereas like the early 2000s Tacomas, and even like the late 90s ones, you can still find with some metal left. Granted, they also, like you said, have the rust issues. And nowadays, finding a really good one for under 10 is going to be a little bit trickier. But if you are reasonable with your expectations, maybe look at the 4-cylinders that go a long time. They had head issues, as we found out, but they go generally for a long time. Get a 4-wheel drive one and have fun with it. I think that's another one that we'll appreciate one day. And what about, there was a supercharged one too, right?
Yeah, there was a factory TRD supercharged one that we actually had race against our Ram TRX. We had a viewer bring in his supercharged Tacoma.
It lost, by the way.
It lost, but granted, it was an old little Tacoma. And I was surprised at how quick that truck took off. That was a mean little rig.
He had a single cab too, right?
I think so, yeah.
I don't know if they did the 3.4 in the single cab. He may have swapped that in for that year. But whatever, it was a really cool truck. So next up on our list, kind of in the same vein, but maybe a little bit older. A lot of them are also made out of rust now, but the Nissan hard bodies, the really old Nissan trucks that is what the Pathfinder was based off of, the early ones. They were called D21s. Very solid trucks, not quite as desirable as the Toyota versions.
Yeah, but like Tommy said, still hard-working, good little trucks. And I actually never got to drive our Pathfinder, but
it was fine.
Since they're based on the same platform, I would imagine that it would perform
quite well.
Round about the same. So when you took the Pathfinder off-road, how did it do?
It's very good. Yeah, they're very underrated. The Toyota just sucks all the air out of the room, be it the 4Runner or the Toyota trucks of the 80s and 90s. But the Nissan was a super well-made vehicle as well. Why were they called the hard body, right? It was something to do with the bed?
Yeah, so from the research that I can figure out, they called it the hard body because it has a double-walled bed, and just because of the styling, because it was blocky and very straight edges.
I think it's a cool truck. I like them a lot.
Cool.
Yeah, you can get them in 4s and I think V6 configurations, but definitely look at the hard body if you can't afford the Toyota. And then you put this one on the list. I'm not really sure what this means. It just says Ford 460.
Yeah, really any truck with a 460 V8 I think is awesome because there's tons of tuning potential for the 460. You can even stroke them out to be massive as if it wasn't already a big enough motor as is. So taking that motor up to new heights, just getting a crazy amount of power out of it would be way cool, and they offered that motor in a ton of different F-Series trucks, any of which I think would be a pretty badass setup to have.
Yeah, they were in like the 70s and the 80s, and I think they were in the 90s. We had it's called a Bricknose, which was a really square one in 1980s Ford with the slightly different engine, had a diesel. But it was an excellent truck, actually. Super simple. It's amazing how easily you can quickly change out body panels and interior bits and how readily available everything is on these old Ford trucks.
Yeah, and a lot of the body styles of so many different generations of the older Ford heavy-duty trucks is just so cool to look at. You actually had a mid-70s F-Series truck that was really cool. That's one of my favorite body styles of truck of all time.
That one had it's called a 360, It was supposed to be a 390, but I think it had a 360. That was like the FE generation of motor, but the 460 was definitely better. So look for a 460 quick big block. Apparently 7.2 liters is not enough for Case, but that's his thing. And then number 1 on the list, or actually number 2, is the first gen Cummins. Talk to me about what that means.
Yeah, so similar to the second gen, it's another super solid Cummins truck. It's the first generation of the Cummins in a Ram truck. And they're a lot simpler than the second gens. I know there's a number of people out there that actually prefer the first gen. They say it works harder, it's easier to work on, it's just a simpler overall truck. Leaf springs in the front. Actually, some of the really earlier models of the first gen Cummins weren't even intercooled. I think it was the 91.5 model year that they went to an intercooler on it. So really simple, durable truck, but I just love the styling of it, that boxy front end. There was actually a couple months ago, I was standing outside of a taco truck, and this first gen dually, two-tone, red and white, came driving by, absolutely mint. Perfect paint, perfectly straight panels, and it was nighttime. The cab lights were lit up, the lights on the fenders were lit up, and I thought, wow, that is a good-looking truck. I would love to own something like that.
It's another truck that's kind of hard to find, though, because a lot of them were used up and thrown away.
Yeah, and rust, of course.
Rusty, yeah. So if you can find one, though, and under 10K, I'd say go for it.
Honestly, I think rust is going to be the enemy of the majority of the trucks that are on this list.
Yes, but not my number 1 choice, which is... Case put the El Camino, but I'm going to scrap that because I want to go more eccentric. I think actually the first generation Subaru Baja, do you remember that like little car trucklet that was based on the Outback?
With the seats rear facing in the back.
No, that's the Brat.
Oh, that is the Brat. You're right.
So the Brat was from the 70s.
I like the Brat.
I like the Brat too. That maybe
the Brat's way cooler than the Baja.
Yeah, but the Brats they're very hard. I mean, they're almost impossible to find in good shape now. And like an early Brat, it got so expensive.
Yeah,
they're really expensive.
But I mean, in good shape, honestly, most of the stuff on this list is hard to find. And that's the thing too. Like when I bought my truck, it definitely needed work. I actually got lucky because mechanically it was super solid. And any one of these that you find for less than 10 grand, I promise you it's going to need work.
So what Case is talking about is they did a vehicle called the Brat, which stood for Bi-Drive Recreational All-Terrain, I think. And it was an old 70s Subaru that they chopped the butt off of.
Yep.
And then to get around the chicken tax, which is this importation duty on out-of-country vehicles that are commercial like trucks, they put these rear-facing jump seats in it.
Yep.
Like literally bolted seats into the bed with these grab handles.
Hell yeah.
And then sold it. So Brats are really cool but expensive. I'm talking about the one that... the Baja from the early 2000s, which was a 4-door Outback, like bright yellow, teeny weeny little bed. The butt of so many jokes, but the first gen's Bajas are actually really sought after for some reason. Like the community around them, they did a turbo model with the right options in the right color. They can be actually over 10K for this crazy little Subaru truck. But if you can find one in good shape under 10, it's worth a consideration because I think they'll be valuable one day because they just didn't make many of them and they're so weird.
Man.
And we got the Santa Cruz coming, right?
Right.
We got the Maverick coming. So maybe these little itty bitty trucks will make a comeback.
I hope you know that the comments are just going to be on fire with people.
Yeah, horrible.
Especially for making the Subaru Baja number 1 on this list.
You put your Cummins on there, and I've got a Subaru with a little 4-foot bed. I know.
Everyone is going to be so upset at us.
That's okay. That's okay. I'll take it. But let us know what you think in the comments below.
Yeah, drop us some comments of trucks that we missed because there are a lot of cool vehicles out there that you can get for pretty reasonable prices. Again, the market right now is just crazy. So, I could pop the grill off of my truck and sell it for 10 grand, but
probably true. So if we're out of whack on any of these, let us know and stay tuned for more TFL Classics videos.
Absolutely.